So now what we're going to do is learn how to stream our data via the internet to a website called ThingSpeak. And to do this, we're going to need a new chip. This is a Wi-Fi chip. Again, it's made by Seed Studio again. And it's got two buttons on it. And it's kind of something that kind of looks like an antenna because it's transmitting information. And it's just like all the other chipsets that we have, is it just plugs in with a 4-pin cable. And kind of like our OLED screen and light sensor and things like that, is it can only be plugged into one spot. This one needs a serial port that goes in and out. So it needs a transmission and it needs to receive, right? Just like a normal internet connection, it needs to send information and it also needs to receive information. And the only pin and ports on your shield that enable that to happen is P15 and P13. It's the one that is right underneath the power. So we're going to always plug in our Wi-Fi chip into that pin. All right, so P13, P15. Okay, so now let's look at how we're going to program it. So I'm starting with the program where I was already getting my light data and my air data. Right, so I've got all of those variables already set, and I'm just going to move these guys out of the way for right now, because what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to need to get an extension that's going to allow me to connect up to my Wi-Fi. So I'm going to go to Advanced, I'm going to go down to Extensions, and here I'm going to type in the word Grove, okay, and I'm going to search. So what we need is this Grove Inventor Seed Studio module or package. Right, so we're going to click on that, and you should get an icon that looks like a, kind of like a 3 little cubes stacked on each other, Grove, because these are all called Grove sensors. They're part of the Grove sensor set, and it installs lots of other options. Right, it installs the ultrasonic, the gesture, being able to do a joystick, but it also installs the Wi-Fi. Okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to use these components to enable us to send data to the Wi-Fi. All right, so let's get going. All right, so I've got my files kind of reorganized. Now, one of the first things we're going to need is we're going to need to initialize or turn on the Wi-Fi in our on start menu. So we just installed the Grove extension, right? And inside that Grove extension, as I scroll down, is my UART Wi-Fi chip. So what I'm going to need to do is set up my Wi-Fi. Okay. So we're going to leave the defaults for the transmission. That means we're going to transmit on P15. We're going to receive on P13. We want to make sure that those are P15, P13. You can leave the baud rate the same. That's just the speed. And if you're on, a Wi-Fi wireless, right, that should be more than sufficient. Then what you'll need to do is type in your internet password. So here, this is the one that we use in some locations. So whatever your internet name is and what your password to that is, that's what you're going to type in there. Okay, and it'll automatically fill in the quotation marks. But this is important because this is setting up our Wi-Fi. So that is step 1. Now step 2, we need to have a sense for what it is that we're going to send. Okay, so just like before, I'm going to make a separate function for my Wi-Fi, and I'm going to call my Wi-Fi send data. So now I've got my data function. First thing I want to do is I want to know if my Wi-Fi has been found. And this can be useful in case you're someplace and you might be logging in where you don't have a password, but it might have something where you have to log in and the web browser does something, or something like that. Or you just typed in the password wrong or the SSID, the name of the Wi-Fi wrong, and it's not finding it. So it can be a little hard to find. Okay, so what I am going to do is I'm actually going to set up a logic block here first. And so I'm going to just drag over my logic, if true then. Now what I want to know is my Wi-Fi okay? And so under my Wi-Fi block, I've got this little block that says Wi-Fi, right? So if my Wi-Fi is okay, then I'm going to want to do stuff, okay? If it's not, I'm going to do something else. Right? So let's just have a little indicator. What I'm going to do on my OLED screen, I'm going to just put in a little show string here, and I'm just going to say sending data. That will be my first indicator that my Wi-Fi is okay if I see these words show up on my screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the program here for about a second or so. So let's say 2 seconds. So the sending data will show up on the screen long enough for me to notice it. And then I'm just going to clear it off the screen. Because all I really want that indicator to do is say, hey, I'm actually sending the data. Okay. Now, what we're going to do next is be able to set this data up so we can send it to a ThingSpeak channel. And ThingSpeak is the website that the data is going to get streamed to. So again, I go to my little Grove block, okay, and I'm just going to send my data to the ThingSpeak. And notice there's a typo in the block. It says ThingSpeak instead of ThingSpeak, right? But it's the same one. Send data to your ThingSpeak channel. And now what we're going to end up doing is you're going to get a API, and we'll talk about how you get that. So it's a special number that you're going to have when you log into ThingSpeak. So this is my API key, so it's going to send the data. Now, and it's going to send it to my account. So kind of think of these numbers as the separate, ways we're going to keep the greenhouses apart. So that's going to be my API key. Okay. Now, with the fields, these are the pieces of data that we're going to want to send. And now it's actually pretty easy because we've got our program all set up. And why we made all those variables in the first part. So I'm going to have my field 1 variable. It's going to send the air temperature. All right. Field 2, it's going to send my humidity. Okay. And maybe in field 3, it's going to send my lux value. All right. So if I have other things, like if I have my water temperature sensor or other pieces of data that I want to be able to send, that's where you'll put it in. And notice you can have send up to 8 pieces of data. So we're just right now going to send air temperature, humidity, light readings. Okay. Now, in the else block, oops, I accidentally hit an else if. But we really only need an else. Okay. So in my else block, this is where I'm going to say, the Wi-Fi is not okay. So what I want to do is I want to show a string. And I'm going to say not connected to the internet. All right. And maybe I want another indicator that maybe on my microbit itself, I'm going to have a little X icon or some indicator that I know that means that I'm not connected to the internet. Okay. All right, so now that's my function send data. Now all that I have to do now is to make sure that my send data function is in the forever loop. So I just go to functions and I'm going to drag my call send data and I'm going to put it at the end. Okay. And so right now my forever loop says call, get my, kind of variables. These are my fixed variables, remember. These are high and air temp, high humidity, and low lux values. I'm going to get me some data. I'll show that data on the screen, right? Then I'm going to control my fan. I'll control my lights, and I'll get some light data, and I'll control my grow lights, right? Then I'm going to send all that data to the internet. Okay. So let's go look at ThingSpeak and figure out how it is that we want to set up ThingSpeak to be able to collect the data from my program. All right, so here we are at ThingSpeak, and it is just thingspeak.com. It's ran by MathWorks. And the first thing you're going to do is, if you don't have an account, we're going to click Get Started for free. Okay. and it'll take you to a new page. And what it will ask you to do is put in your email, and then it will ask you for a password, right? But if you don't have one, you have to click on this Create One button. All right, so here it's going to ask you for email, address, last name, and then it'll ask you to set up a password. Okay, so it's just like setting up an account anywhere else. Okay, so I've already got an email and a password set up. Right, so this is going to allow me to log into ThingSpeak. Okay. Now, I've already got a greenhouse where it's sending data. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a new channel. Okay, so you will see something that will be a little bit more blank. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a new channel because you won't have anything in this spot. So when you go to channels, my channels, yours will be blank. What you're going to do is create a new channel. Okay. So let's call this, I'm going to call mine, this is going to be Thanos's Retirement Greenhouse. Okay. So I'm just going to say the description is just a practice greenhouse. And if you're working in a team, you can put your team name here. You can put, any other kind of descriptor. This is for Mrs. Black Widow's class or something like that. Now, if you remember back to our setting up the program, we had the fields. Okay? So you have to make sure that your fields correspond to the labels. Right? So if you remember that field 1 label was air temp, was the variable. So I'm going to say air temperature here. Okay? Notice these other ones are grayed out. You have to click this little checkbox to be able to add a new variable. My second one was humidity. And now my third one, if you remember, was lux. Right? And you can even do light value, right? Or light intensity, right? That's really what lux is. So if I had more, I would just keep checking the boxes, right? And I would put the name in here. But you do have to make sure that those fields, right, field 1, field 2, field 3, right, are the same here, right? So you don't want your humidity being sent to field 1 if it's going to represent air temperature, right? So you don't want to mess these names up. You want these names to correlate to the variable, okay? Now, you don't have to do anything else here. You can have your location if you want to, right? You can Google your address and it will tell you what the latitude and longitude is if you want to do that. Okay. You can even embed a video and things like that. But what we're going to do, this is all that we need to do. So we're going to save channel. And notice instantly on my channel, I get Thanos's Retirement. Oops, I misspelled retirement. Retirement Greenhouse, right, is the header. Okay? And so I'm not getting any data yet because I haven't downloaded my data to my microbit yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to go do that. Okay? So here I am. I'm going to be back at my make code. Okay? So I think I've got everything all set. All right, double check my API. Now, just to double check where your API is in ThingSpeak is when you go into ThingSpeak, you're going to see this block up here that says API keys. You'll click that. That is going to be your API key. Okay? So you'll just copy that. Okay? And you're going to go back into MakeCode and you'll put in your API key. Alright, so now if you remember where we had to put in that crazy 9-digit API key and go, where's that at? Right, we can't stream anything unless we know that. So if you go to API keys, once you've logged in, right, you've got a write API key and you've got a read API key. So if we go back to our make code, notice it says, what's your write API key? This is the API key that you're going to use to write data to your specific channel. Okay? So if I go back to ThingSpeak, right? My right API key for this channel is the ZUCB, right? It's very long, so you just highlight it and you're going to copy it. And what you're going to do in make code is you're going to paste it. So each of your channels will end up with this API key, and you want to make sure that you've got the right API key for the right channel, or else what's going to happen is you're going to be sending data to your wrong channels, right? And we don't want that to happen. Okay, so for the most part, if you only have one greenhouse, you're only going to have one API key. But if you've got multiple channels, right, you're going to have multiple APIs keys. All right, so now I've got my right API key. It's all good, right? I've got checked my Wi-Fi password, username, everything's good. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to download this program just like we always do to your microbit, and then we are going to begin to see if we can populate our data. So let's download the program and go back to ThingSpeak. All right, so here we are back in ThingSpeak. I've got my data coming in, right, streaming from my internet. And so I've got my air temperature, I've got the time, right? Notice I managed to change this air temperature from Thanos' retirement greenhouse. What we can do to do that is you just click on this little pencil icon and you can change the title of the graph. And so I'm just going to say this is relative humidity, and my y-axis is going to be time, and my x-axis is going to be humidity. And I can change other things in here. I can change how often I want data to show up. I can decide if I want to round the data, you know, stuff like that. I can decide what my data min, data max is. I can also change my y-axis, minimum to maximum, right? So for humidity, right, it's going to always be somewhere between 0 and 100, right? So when I change that, notice my y-axis changes. So if you're in a spot where your relative humidity isn't going to change very much, and you want it to, say, have your graph to be a little bit more flexible in what you can see or easier to see, I'm going to change this to say probably in my house my humidity is probably will drop down to 30%, and it's probably not going to get over 80. Right? So notice my time graph gets a little bit easier. Now, if you do not do that and you leave this blank, what it's going to do is it's going to be bounded by the data. Right? So I've got a little bit of fluctuation in here, but look at the fluctuation. It goes from 59 to 61. Right? So sometimes having graphs on this scale can mislead you into thinking that you've got a lot of data going up and down. So that's why I do like putting in slight scales in my y-axis to just make sure, you know, my humidity isn't going up and down a lot, right? But if you wanted to do a fine detailed analysis, then you can change the y-axis and you can see that fluctuation. I'm going to do the same thing over here with air temperature and time. All right, so I'm going to change out the data min, and I'm going to say usually my greenhouse should be over 40 degrees. And it's probably not going to get over 100. Let's say 105, just to be safe. Alright, oops. So let's say 40 and 105. There we are. Everything else is the same. Boom. Alright, so notice my temperature is being pretty stable, which, you know, it probably will be. You'll see fluctuations on the course of a day, right? Or if you've got your greenhouse in the sun, right, and the sun comes and goes, right, you'll see fluctuations like that. Now, down here is my light lux value is field 3, so let's change that. Lux value. And I'm going to put in my x-axis, I'm going to say light intensity, just as a reminder to me that lux is light intensity. My y-axis, again, is time. Okay. And this one will take a little bit of playing around with on your minimum axes, right? So if I say maybe 500 is my min and maybe 6,000 is my max, right? And so depending on where you have your greenhouse, right, you'll be able to change those numbers, right? And notice if you make it too orange, right, you won't be able to see it. So what I'm going to do for right now is I will leave those blank so I can see my numbers again. Okay. So again, you'll just have to play with the y-axis so that you can see the numbers. But again, notice my light intensity, even though it looks like it's fluctuating a lot, it really isn't right now. All right. But what we can do with my light sensor, right, is I can always move it closer to a light source, or I can always shine a light on it. And just remember, it takes a while for the program to update. And we should see on our data here a jump in the light intensity, and there it is, right? All of a sudden my light intensity jumped to 1,827. And as I get my light closer, we should see another jump. Because again, remember, the light intensity is inversely proportional to the distance the light is away. So now I've got my light intensity reading of 2257. Right, so if I take it out in the sun, it'll go up even more. And now that I've taken the light down again, you should be able to see the light intensity value go back down again. So again, our Y value is going to change based upon the levels of the data. So if you're anticipating seeing large fluctuations like this, might as well just leave the Y-axis at blank, right? But if you're expecting things to stay in a range, then you can change it so you can see the individual data points. Okay. So now you also can do things to make things a little bit easier to be able to view, and that is what we're going to do next. Alright, so I've got my graphs where we're streaming the data, but sometimes it might be easier to allow a user not to look at a graph, but maybe to look like a dashboard or something like that. You know, it kind of depends on who you think is going to be reading at comfort level with interpreting line graphs, and sometimes that can be hard for people. So what we can do here at the top is I've got add visualizations and I've got add widgets. Okay. Now, a couple other things that we have to do. Notice right now I've got my tab in private view. This is my public view. So this is going to be my website up here where I've got ThingSpeak.com channels 1461305, right? And anybody should be able to see that greenhouse with that link. But right now, the default is not to share. And how we do that is I go to sharing, right? And then I can click share this channel view with everyone. That means that anybody who has the URL will be able to see it, or you can just share it with special people. Okay. So now that's going to be set. So now if I go back to my public view, this is what the public sees. Okay. And my private view is only what I see. So I can use my private view to, to test things out to see how it goes. And if I like it, and then I can add that to my public view. So let's play around with my private view here, and so we can see how we can add a few other things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a widget. So I can add a gauge, I can add a numeric display, or I can add an indicator. Okay, let's add a gauge. Okay, so let's click next. So let's say I want my gauge to be temperature. Alright, and my temperature, if you remember, is field 1. And I'm going to have it go to 40 to 100, let's say 110. Right? My measurements is in Fahrenheit. I can change my tick intervals and things like that, and how often I want to update my gauge. Now I can also put down here some kind of color indicators. So let's say my range is danger, and maybe I want, if it's over 80, I really want it to be in the red. Okay. Now, let's say if it's, say, 70 to 80, that's going to be in the warning phase, so maybe I want my color to be yellow. And then if it's, say, some 40 to 70, maybe plants are okay. So I'm going to have that in my green phase. Okay. Now again, you can also decide that, hey, 40 is awfully cold for your plant, so you can add another one in if you wanted to, and say if it's some 40 to 50, that should be red too, or some other color, or purple or something like that, or blue, that it's cold, things like that. So, but now I think I've got everything. So now I've got a gauge, right, that says how warm it is and what the temperature is, right, and it points right to it. Now if you notice on my public view, that's not there, right? So what I have to do is, if you want something to show up on your public view, you have to add the widget here again, right? So you have to do the same thing. Alright, so I'm going to say 40, max is 100, it was in Fahrenheit, tick intervals, I'm going to say if it's 80 to 100 red, if it's 70 to 80, I'm going to have that to be yellow, and then if it's, say, 50 to 70, or let's say 69.9, something like that, it's going to be green. But then if it happens to, say, be in a range of 40 to 49.99, right, almost up to 50, I'm going to want it to be purple or blue. Let's say blue, because that's going to be cold. Okay, so now I can create this, and now that shows up on my public view. Okay. So now anybody with this URL, which is your channel, which is a channel assigned to your microbit, will be able to easily see the data streaming from your greenhouse. Right, so if you're trying to help somebody figure out what's maybe going wrong with their greenhouse, this could be a great place to start. Okay. All right. So I can add other widgets. I'm going to add a numeric display. This one I'm going to say is light intensity. And it was field 3. And measurement values were in lux. Alright, and I'm just going to leave it as an integer, right? Decimal is if you wanted to have, 27.34, something like that. Here it doesn't really matter. Our light sensor isn't that sensitive. And what I'm going to do is I am going to create that, and that's my light reading. And again, I should be able to just shine a flashlight on my light sensor and be able to see my light readings change in my reading. Alright, there it's starting to head up. And notice it tells you when it was last updated. Alright. So that's kind of how you can make different widgets, right? I can make a lamp indicator, right? If I just say, hey, I need some visual, and it just needs to be red, blue, or green. Something is good. I don't care about the number. I just want to know whether it's bad or good, and that could be red, green, and yellow. You can almost treat the lamp indicator as the equivalent LED, right? Strip is how we use the LED strip on our greenhouse. And then all of these other settings up here is where you can go back and edit it, right? Channel settings, right? I can fix my misspelling of retirement, right? You can, again, always add fields later to your channel. You don't have to make a new channel when you add new sensors, okay? And what's also nifty is you can import and export your data, right? And so we can have it go to the right time, and we are on Eastern time here in the Boston area, right? So I can upload or download my data. So let's download the data. So let's find us in Eastern time, USA. There we are. Alright, so now if I click download, it's going to download all my data as a spreadsheet. And it's going to look like this format. Right? But now we can graphic. Alright, so you'll download it as a CSV file, which you can open up into export or into Excel, and we'll play around with that in another video. But that's really all there is to ThingSpeak. It's actually fairly easy. Some of the key things that you have to remember is where your API keys are. Right? To make sure that it's sharing, that it's public, so you can just share a URL. Right? And then usually what I end up doing is I mostly spend my time editing the public mode, because if I do something in here that I don't like and say, you know, I really don't want my lux value anymore, you can just click the X and it goes away. Alright, so it's actually fairly straightforward on how you navigate ThingSpeak.